want to talk to you today about is a lot of people don't understand how to just use how does are dominant just like bucks. Well, you get adult doe groups and you get doe group families and whatnot, but you get certain does in those groups that are the matriarch does. They're the dominant ones, and they get almost as frustrated and angry as intruders as dominant bucks do. And so that's where this lure really comes into play. And so like in this situation here, what I got behind me is an apple tree. Okay, now this tree's, it's done gave the apples up. They've done used them already. But what I'm talking to you about now is going into this upcoming season, how you could utilize this apple tree to your advantage if this apple tree hits. And one thing you can do is you can come in here and fertilize this apple tree, which is what I'm going to do next. And it should hit again this year. But a lot of deer were hitting this apple tree this year and they were loving it. So what I'm going to do is, with this Doe Matriarch this coming year, what I'll do is, knowing that these does are hitting this, and they, and the bucks check it too in the rut because they're looking for, any of these deer that are in this area. And, any of the does that might be hot, they know that this is a food source, so they make their circles around it from these bedding areas. And I got a lot of bedding here, and this is all doe bedding right here. It's close to the food. The does usually bed closest to the food. The bucks will bed farther back. And being, I got a cornfield right here, being that this is so close to this food source, what I'll do come this year is I'll take this Black Widow, Doe Matriarch, and I'll back off this apple tree just a little bit. And I'm going to make a scrape, okay? And I'll get those bucks, starting to use that scrape as they come into this to feed on their own. Well, eventually them does, they work those scrapes too. They like to smell them and step in them, and I don't necessarily think they clean them out and paw them out, but they'll smell them scrapes and they like to urinate in them themselves. Like a community scrape is what I want to start. And I'll leave it alone. Basically, I'll just start using just straight doe urine at the part of the year. Probably midsummer. Well, then as fall starts to approach, and you get them deer really using it, the bucks are using it, and then a season comes in, one thing you can do is take this Doe Matriarch and you can start hitting that scrape, okay? And what it becomes is a doe that adult doe that's using this food source is not used to. And as she starts to come into heat, because, as her cycle starts to come in towards, later November, or later October, I'm sorry, she's going to come to that scrape wanting to urinate in it, and a lot of bucks know that she's coming into heat. Well, if she feels like she's got competition from another big adult doe, like a main doe, she's going to start coming to that scrape earlier because she wants to catch that doe hitting that scrape. She doesn't understand it. She don't know who that doe is. She's never run into her personally. She's never been able to encounter her. All she knows is that every once in a while she comes in here and that doe is peed in that scrape and it's making her aggravated. Well, that is a good way to get those does hitting that scrape earlier. Therefore, if you're hunting and you're hunting close to that scrape and that food source, like, out here to this field, they're going to hit this apple tree, work their way out to the main food source. You can get in between the bedding and the apple tree even. But this apple tree is pretty close to bedding. So, I can have a scrape there and I can have another one up here. But if you start working it with this Doe Matriarch, you're going to get them deer using it earlier. That doe's going to come in there, and then hence what's going to happen? That buck is going to start coming to that scrape earlier, looking to see if those does are using it. I mean, it's pretty simple theories when it comes to these deer and how they work. They're territorial, they're dominant, whether it's dominant bucks or dominant does. You're going to get insubordinate deer and young bucks and all that using these same scrapes, but they're not going to be those ones that really get to that point where it literally drives them to get out of their bed and go check it out. They're going to do it just because it's natural to them, and they'll do it whenever they decide to come here. But these bigger deer, these older deer, whether it's old does or old bucks, they're the ones that get frustrated with those kind of situations, whether it's a dominant buck hitting another dominant buck scrape and he's never been able to catch him and he wants to run him out of there. And he's never is going to catch him because it's you doing that to it. If it's typically another deer that intrudes in his area, he catches up to him because he can track him. And they figure this out. They run into each other on a food plot or a cornfield or on an edge somewhere or on one of these scrapes. And they get into a fight, and whichever one wins, that becomes his area. Well, same thing kind of with does and food sources. So if you get to a really hot food source like this at that time of the year, when things are ramping up with breeding, and you do that, you're going to get does. You're going to get this adult doe that's normally here trying to kick this doe out of here because she can't ever catch her. So she's going to keep coming to the scrape looking for her because this is the only place she can find her. So that's just your tip this time for the instructional videos of Black Widow deer lures. If you've never used Black Widow deer lures, please do so because they're awesome lures. You can just go to blackwidowdeerlures.com. You can watch a lot of hunts on our show, Whitetail Edge, and you'll be able to see a lot of action, where we've used these lures for success for the last 4 or 5 years in the woods in the fall. And we use them different multiple ways, not only just as attractants, but as cover sprays and different things like that. And we'll be bringing you more of that to come.